Hey there, my name is Rachel Kalaki.
I'm Annie.
And I'm Shelby. And welcome to the Magdala podcast.
We know from experience that pornography, masturbation, and other sexual addictions are not just a guy problem.
The need for women to be accompanied in their journey toward healing from addiction has gone sorely unmet, and that's why we're here.
Magdala is a space where women can find hope, healing, and freedom from sexual addiction through support, community, and accountability.
Here on the podcast, you'll find everything from testimonies to practical advice to discussions on how to live fully as a Catholic woman.
You are not alone, and wherever you are on your journey, we welcome you to this table.
Well, we are going to get started. Ladies, welcome back to the Magdala podcast. This is Annie, and we are here and joined today by a friend of mine, Shelly, that I've now known for several years. I met back in college doing some research, but Shelly is a dietitian friend of mine. And to note, I think some of the listeners know my background is in nutrition and in dietetics. So after grad school, so I got my bachelor's and master's in nutrition, went to after I graduated grad school, that's a sentence, went on to take my boards right as I was starting a 2-year missionary program, and then immediately joined the full-time staff of Magdala, and have since then joined part-time with a nutrition practice to still be working as a dietitian. So that's sort of my side gig, but I live in a land of many side gigs. I feel like that's a fun life to live. But Shelly, you are new to our viewers, our listeners. That's what it is. Would love for you to share a little bit about yourself. How did you get into nutrition and your background as a dietitian?
So I am a dietitian like Annie, but mainly helping women have a healthy and joyful relationship with their food. I've been practicing for many years, and in most recent years moved over to focusing more on eating disorders, disordered eating, and ADHD and the impact that can have on all of it. So I'm doing a mix of like one-on-one sessions and group stuff, but I just really love working with people who get to see that transformation of how and why they're thinking about food and going to a place of way more freedom and enjoyment and just like being able to truly nourish themselves through this area of their life while keeping in mind the context that it's not just about the food and like there's all these other factors of life.
I remember when I was in high school looking into majors and finally decided on nutrition. It's a very neat niche thing. You know, if you want to major in business, almost every college has it. But most people, when you tell you're going into dietetics, they don't even know what that means. So just curious, what got you into dietetics and nutrition in the first place?
Yeah, it was an 8th grade science fair project. So a little bit before I was looking into majors, just got really into my science fair project on vitamin C content of vegetables and cooking method.
I love that.
And my dad noticed. Yeah, it was super nerdy. I don't really know if I would have been exposed to nutrition otherwise, but I'm really grateful for it because I really love it. I love how it's connected to everything. I love how doing nutrition interventions affects the rest of your life. I like the integration of all of it. And so I did a lot of job shadows when I was in high school, and then, like you said, right, looked into majors and picked out of however many there were available schools that could offer that program, and be credentialed. So yeah, it was an 8th grade science fair project. I picked it kind of early. So there were some moments where I felt like maybe I picked it too soon and I didn't really have enough experience. Kind of waffled back and forth, but for the most part, it's been good.
I love when you're surrounded by everybody making baking soda volcanoes and you said, but wait, the vitamin C content was what made you stand out in that science fair project. Did you win? Do you remember?
I think I got second.
Okay. Who beat you out?
I don't remember that part.
Oh. Well, second place is still something to be proud of. I'm sure you have that medal displayed somewhere, so you can always remember that. I remember maybe junior year, I was in some AP science class where they let you sort of pick your own project type thing. And that was the first time I did something I guess, I think it was like BMI oriented. I was 16 and ready to share why the BMI system is corrupt or something. But I remember that being a crucial time where I discovered that that's sort of what I wanted to do when I went off to college. I've shared this previously, but so I have struggled with multiple diagnosed eating disorders, and that started sort of in 6th and 7th grade. So I always had sort of a hyper fixation on food in a lot of different ways, and that went through different seasons. So I would say there was a year or two that would be categorically more like anorexia, a year or two that went more like binge eating disorder, a year or two that looked more like bulimia. And so through all those different symptoms, it was probably by like junior year of high school that I was actively trying to recover. There were many years of, quote, me in recovery, but it didn't look like I was trying to do anything. So it was probably by junior year that I was like actively trying to recover. And then it was in that space, I was like, oh, this is something I could do with the rest of my life. I was so interested in food, obviously, because of how much I had hyperfixated on it for years. And when I discovered that was something I could do, as I was discovering what a healthy relationship with food looked like, that other people needed help with this too, I was all in. But then I was really surprised by the time I went to college. The school that I went to, one of our like intro classes was sort of a like intro to dietetics, and they just sort of let you know like different things you can do with the major. And I was blown away because I had come in thinking like, oh, I can do disordered eating. And I'm like, I'm sure you need nutrition for like, I'll say more significant medical diagnoses things. But I guess I didn't have, and then maybe sports nutrition. Like I was an athlete. I knew that was like an area. But I remember them listing like, I mean, slides after slides on the PowerPoint of like different places that RDs were working. And I didn't realize how vast it was. And throughout my years in college, like most people who go and major in dietetics, you might shift your interests several times back and forth because you start to discover new things. But by the end, and me now working in practice, have ended up in sort of an eating disorder, disordered eating space again, which is also sort of the space that you land in, along with a few other focuses. So I'm curious if there's anything that led you to land in that particular space or niche part of nutrition and dietetics.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to go into something that was a little more open and less like, eat this, not that. Because a lot of the eat this, not that rules didn't quite fit what I was seeing and didn't feel great when I'm thinking about coming from like that multicultural background that I have and having a lot of family foods listed as like on the not great side. And I'm like, I don't think this is right. There can't be only the one Mediterranean way of eating for the entire world. Like that doesn't make sense. Yeah. But that's kind of what it was. And so I was like, okay, I don't see this. This is before I knew about intuitive eating. I also just had a lot of experience with a lot of weight bias and discrimination in some of the healthcare settings that I was working in when I was witnessing the way that some of the dietitians or other providers would treat patients. And that didn't sit well with me. So I had these things, but I didn't have any framework to put them in. So I started my own business doing coaching and then found out about intuitive eating and health at every size framework and started learning about that. And once I got that down, then I was like, oh, I really want to work with disordered eating. I specifically did not work with eating disorders at the beginning of my career because I thought you had to have, I don't know, different experience or something. It's one of those things where, you keep telling yourself like you're not good enough to do X, Y, Z. And so I got a lot more experience and I started going to a lot more trainings and a lot more like consult groups around eating disorders because it was very fascinating to me and I loved it. I saw that some of my patients with disordered eating actually had eating disorders and then I would just stop working with them. But I felt like that was probably not the best approach. So I wanted to expand a little bit of what I could do. And there's just nationally not enough eating disorder professionals for the amount of people who are suffering or struggling. And after a while, some people in the consult group were like, really should think about getting into this. And so I took one. It went terribly. This case went terribly. I was not a good fit. It wasn't about her eating disorder. It was just about everything else. So I just gave up for like another year. And then I
Yeah.
started getting back into it once I had more support. And it's just been so rewarding ever since then. Like, this is where my interest lies. This is where a lot of my strengths are. It's not that I don't know enough. It's just that I didn't have enough resources to support me in that. So it was kind of a gradual, like, building and discovering, and then just gathering enough of the resources and support around me to actually make that change. Which is kind of the, you know, the whole process of any change, right? But I like how that just kind of echoes this kind of feeling in the story of how people also get support in their journey of recovery, and just kind of like love how that transition happened so gradually rather than just knowing from the start, like, this is what I want to do with my life.
Totally. I think the process of healing, one, women in the Magdala community understand this very well, that when we talk about our small groups, women struggling with sexual addiction that come to us in Magdala, we aren't a fix-it project. We aren't a do our program and then you're solved, you know. Though some women do sign up with the like secret hope that that's what it's going to be, and then they realize healing is like a lifelong journey. It's a process. It's about learning tools for that. I mean, that's similar in the journey with food and our body and healing. Like, there's a process that we get to enter into. And the start of the process is the signing up or saying yes to it. I might have shared this on this podcast before, but I'm one of the main people that gets inquiries from our women in Magdala who are interested in joining a small group. And it's very common that I'll hear the story of like, I've been getting emails from you for over a year and I'm finally going to do it. I'm finally going to do it. And I'm sure you've seen this in your nutrition practice too, of sometimes it takes us a lot of hurdles to jump through before we acknowledge like, oh, I could really benefit from help in this area. I know in my own heart, I have tons of self-sufficiency. I'm always working through. So I have maybe a greater sense of empathy towards that, just because personally I'm the same way. It's like, I'm fine. I'll get through it. You know, I got tough skin. It's not that bad. All the excuses that we make. But it's so true. Like, we have to go through these hurdles in order to actually say yes to receiving more help. And you went through your own hurdles on the journey before you were able to find this niche area that seems like you're just the place where you flourish. You nourish to flourish. Have you ever seen those stickers? I feel like that's a dietitian thing.
Yes.
You've seen those?
Yes. I would also say it's the other way around too, though, right? Flourish to nourish. Because otherwise it could just be like the food is the function, you know, and like we don't have the joy there. So I do like the idea of like it's cyclical.
Totally. So this is what the audience doesn't understand is when you get multiple dietitians together, there's just a few niche things that always sort of come out. I mentioned the BMI scale earlier, and that's always like a fun, like, I'll call it dinner table conversation that you bring it out. So I love that you had something to say about nourish to flourish or flourish to nourish. We're made to be flourishing, and that comes through our nourishing. You're so right. But yes, what you just shared, people have so many misconceptions to food, what it means to nourish, what is even the function of food. That's something in my practice I get into, like in talking to some clients about. But there's definitely a lot of misconceptions around food, misconceptions around what a dietitian is, right? The idea that the dietitian is just the person who's going to give me the meal plan and then I just do it and then it's fine. Like, that's as if that's the only thing that needs help or healing. And so just curious in your work, if you've had any like misconceptions come up when people think about your work or people you work with or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've definitely heard the ones that you just mentioned, including the self-sufficiency part of like,
yes,
oh yeah, I kind of know already and I'll just keep trying it. I'll just do some more. I'm like, yeah, how's that been working for you? Because like,
yeah,
you know, if you like, yes, you know a lot of things, but clearly there's something else happening here or you would already be doing it, right? And sometimes what we know is actually the issue and not like, you don't need more knowing. Sometimes it's actually the implementing or correcting. Like sometimes what we know is actually not right. And we need a little bit of someone else outside of us saying, okay, well, what about this? Or where did you get that from? Maybe like shifting that the things that we tell ourselves are true, right? And that helps.
Yeah.
I mean, in recovery and anything, but I've seen that a lot. I've seen that concept of like the policing your eating. Like, you know, when somebody's sitting down to you eating and then they're like, oh, what do you do? And you're like, this conversation is going to be interesting, because then you say you're a dietitian, then they start apologizing or excusing their food or whatever it is. And, oh, don't judge my food. I'm like, I'm not going to. You're not my client. I'm not going to judge my client's food. What you eat, if you're not my client, is none of my business. I just want to enjoy my own food. So I don't know, it just makes it like super awkward, right? But I've seen that quite a bit. The other one regarding self-sufficiency is like the idea that I'm not sick enough to get care. Especially when we're talking about eating disorders or disordered eating, or like, I don't have a diagnosis. It's just the same as everybody else. Other people struggling more, those kind of things. Like, I think that kind of plays into the same idea of that self-sufficiency of like, I can figure this out. It's not that bad. If it gets really bad, or if I get really stuck, I'll reach out for help. But there's just the idea that it has to be at a certain point before you can get help, or before you can ask or get resources or support. Why not do it now before it gets to that point? Like, wouldn't you rather have a fun and free life around food before it gets really, really bad and you're like really struggling with this? Like, why not address it now when it's kind of in its infancy?
And isn't it interesting that a lot of people aren't even able to identify that point, right? If you were to ask them, what is the line that you need to reach that would be considered bad? Often they don't even have the reference to know what that is. Again, it's just another excuse. It's another thing we make up. Like, oh, I would get help, but the list goes on and on. We, as part of the Magdala curriculum, one of the readings we do is part of C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce. And it's a part where, I don't have to go into the whole details, but basically there's a ghost that's making excuses for a red lizard, which symbolizes our lust. And so the reason why we keep going back into these same cycles that we don't want to keep falling into, it's excuse after excuse. I don't have time. Let me check with the doctor first. I'm just tired. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. And these same excuses come up when we're trying to receive help. But often people don't even know what that line would be when they need to get help. But they make a line. It's just another list of excuses, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I'm sure you see this in your clients too. When you ask them like, why now? Sometimes they'll have an actual thing that they're saying, and other times it will just be like, it's time. Like, I've been struggling with this for so long. Like, there's not actually a turning point in some people. Like, it's just they've dealt with this for long enough. Or, you know, I said, looking back, like, at what point do you wish it had been different? And sometimes it's like way, way back, like when I was 6, when I was 8, right? So if you're already past those ages and you've already looking back, you're like, man, I wish it was different, but it's not bad enough now to get care. It doesn't matter. Just go get care now, right? Like, you don't have to wait until you're older to look back even more and say like, wow, I wish I had gotten care back then when I was thinking about it, when I heard this podcast and I was considering, and it didn't seem bad enough at the time, even though I could point to some things. Like, it's okay. If it's even marginally helpful, wouldn't that be worth it?
Yeah, totally. And what you just described a little bit earlier, I see being the case a lot with a lot of women that I work with, a lot of women that I see that come through Magdala, through a lot of friends, is the idea of it appearing normal to so many people in culture, in context. I would say that there are many habits of disordered eating. And so let me also make a distinction. There's a difference between having like a tendency or a habit that is disordered, hence a disordered eating habit, different than a diagnosed eating disorder. None of us are coming on this podcast to diagnose somebody with an eating disorder. That's not in our scope. But there are many tendencies that I'm sure you see every day with different people that you see that I would label as disordered, but it can come off so normal. everybody does this. The idea of like, oh yeah, skipping meals, totally normal. I see people around me do it. You shared the example of maybe the turning point that they needed was when they were 6 or 8. A lot of people might think it's normal for young girls to be thinking about weight loss and dieting. I remember one study said something along the lines of like the average age that a girl starts thinking about dieting as an option is somewhere between 8 and 10. And that was, my experience being in middle school. So I was maybe 11 or 12 and I thought about that. But also I was talking to my classmates, and if you had asked them, they would want to lose weight too. Do they have any context of what that means? No, not at all. Did I have any context of what that means? No. But in that scenario, it is, quote, normal, meaning a lot of people are doing it, right? It's the age-old peer pressure thing. Everybody else is doing it. So not that it's necessarily fine, but I guess it's hard to identify a problem or even try to leave a problem if maybe problem isn't the language that you would use then, because if everybody else is doing it, it can't be that bad. I feel like that could be logic that some people get into.
Right. The common but not normal situation, right?
Yes.
Like it's common. There's a lot of people struggling with this or doing this behavior or thinking this way, but it doesn't mean that it's normal or ordered.
Yes.
I mean, that goes for any disordered behavior, not just eating, right? Like it matters the communities and the context that we're in and our standards that we're surrounding ourselves with, because it's hard to notice the water if you're in it, right? Like the fish example, right? Somebody swims by and to this young fish and he's like, isn't the water great? And the little fish are like, what's water?
Yeah. Oh, I like that example. I've never heard that before. And yes, it's using the context of, I mean, I'm glad you keep bringing up even cultural norms. Like culturally, like normal eating looks different. So when I describe normal, I don't at all mean that there's a one size fits all for anything when it comes to food, nutrition, our bodies, sizes, any of that. That would be incorrect. But there's definitely a lot of common areas that you see in modern culture, or maybe even just like streams of thought patterns that I see come up a lot. That I would identify that a lot of people might not recognize as something that would be an example of disordered eating. So like just personally, like when thinking of like clients I work with or people that I'm around all the time, like language that I hear a lot. Basically, this is just me going to rant about some things that are pet peeves of mine. But one of them, and then you get to do the same if you would like to. But one of them for me is the idea of exercising as punishment, so that if I calorically intake too much, I've been, quote, bad, and so that means I have to go exercise more. So anytime I hear my friends say, oh yeah, I have to go to the gym because I ate too much the day before, the classic like post-Thanksgiving thing that people do, or the idea of, oh, I ate too much, so that means that I shouldn't have anything for dinner. This thought process also then relates to the reverse of I can save up calories, if you've heard that idea of like, oh, I'm having a big meal later, my family's coming over, so I'm going to purposely eat next to nothing the whole day because that's going to be the thing that allows my body to receive more food. And just to combat that here, in case somebody's like, oh, I have thought that, but nobody's ever explained it to me, just to combat that thought a little bit, the idea that you are saving up for something later, your body is made for consistent nourishment. There's always a time that you are in need of more energy so that you can be functioning and flourishing. And so anytime you're putting your body at a detriment or a deficit, what you are doing is you are not setting your body up for success in being able to function and digest the major meal that you're trying to have later. What you're doing is you're setting off your hunger cues and your hormone levels so they're not ready to actually receive that meal. What you're doing is creating a sense of distrust in your body. Your body doesn't know the next time it's getting food, so it might start to act out. And so this is where you see a lot of people who struggle with disordered eating might have long periods of restriction and then things like overeating or binging that comes out. It's because your body doesn't trust that it's going to get food, so it starts acting sort of on its own accord. And then this thought process too, to combat the like, oh, I've been unquote bad from eating too much, so I have to work out as punishment. No food that you could eat is bad. Like, food has no moral value to it. Knowing that many people who listen to this are Christian or Catholic, like, obviously the next response I hear is like, okay, but gluttony's a sin. I was like, yes, that's true. But gluttony is the action that comes from eating food in excess. It doesn't come from food, period. The food itself has no moral value. So there's no food that should ever be labeled as good or bad. Yes, there are foods that can provide more micronutrients and macronutrients. That's awesome. But no food in itself is bad. So that was me going on a few rants there, but I'm wondering if you have, I guess, any common threads or thought patterns that you hear or see out there that would be helpful to combat or address.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea, the first one that you said around like the good or bad and like having to either work it off or save up for, this idea that, it's something to be budgeted for, or
yes,
like there's that scarcity around food, right? Like, and that could be from a lot, like maybe this makes sense in your life. Maybe you do have that scarcity history around food, or feeling like you have that, like maybe food's all around you, but you've been limiting that. That comes up a lot. The other piece about that is like you are setting yourself up for this situation where you're saying that you have to earn or make up for your food. If you have to earn or make up for food, that means you're telling yourself that you, as a human being who has dignity put there by God, has to earn or make up for something that is necessary for your survival. Food is a basic human right. And you're telling yourself that you have to earn it or make up for it. That doesn't sound ordered.
Yeah.
Right? So that'll be my first one on that. I guess that's the first 2 points of just, that comes up so often that I hear people talking about this idea that if that's, because then what happens? Like, then it unravels this thinking, right? Like, okay, well, if that's true and I don't have to do this, if it is a basic human right, then why am I doing this for me when I wouldn't keep food from somebody else? Then we get into all the stuff that's underneath, right? So if you're feeling like the way that you treat yourself around food is different than the way that other people, that you would treat other people around food, or that things that you say to yourself around food is never what would come out of your mouth for somebody else, that would be another thing that I hear a lot of in my clients and the work that we're doing together. And then the other piece, responding to yours, is that the idea of gluttony, of not just like eating in excess, but the concept of eating in excess in this kind of consumer mentality that is at the expense of other things that are good. So
yes,
it's not just like the occasional, like, oh, I ate past comfortable fullness. Oh no, now I have to go, like, because again, it flips us into that, like, now I'm bad and I can't do this. And then we start under eating. It's this idea of somewhat of a way of coping, and somewhat this piece of like taking advantage of a situation, right? So I just feel that a little bit differently than what sometimes we would say culturally, again, is gluttony, like you pointed out, right? And also to note that it's more like usually what I've heard it as is more of that habitual process of doing this, not necessarily like occasionally I eat past comfortable fullness, like on Thanksgiving, or when I got really excited about this food or something like that. It's more about the way and the reason that we're doing that, right?
Totally. Well, what you just shared, that in my mind, and how I come to process something that is similar, thinking about the women in the context of Magdala, that a lot of times it can be easy to narrow down lust just into sexual desire. But those two things aren't equivalent at all. Sexual desire is a gift from God, a really good thing. But if you're engaging in that sexual desire in a way that's not ordered to your state in life, in a way that's self-focused, self-directed, that's where we get into the sin of lust. And so similarly, just to overeat or have an extra cookie, or like you said, at Thanksgiving dinner, have another slice of pie, that in itself is not gluttony. But is it happening at to the extent of everything else that's happening in your life? I would also argue, this is my take off the record. This isn't Annie from Magdala. Annie is a dietitian. This is just Annie speaking from the hundreds of women that I've talked to about their bodies in different areas of their life, that the average woman has a tendency not towards gluttony, has a tendency towards restriction. The average woman that I meet is much more likely to not go to that extreme, but to go towards the other extreme of malnourishment. I have no idea if you have thoughts on that take, but I find it funny when people are afraid of that, because I'm like, I feel like that's nowhere near where you are, and so I don't feel like you need to be afraid of that.
Even when we're talking about binge eating, I would say that that's different than gluttony, generally
Yes,
speaking.
I agree.
Yeah. And for context, people who are listening, binge eating often is where you experiencing kind of this feeling of being out of control around either a particular food or around food in general, and you eat to the point of discomfort or pain, usually in one instance, amount that is, and this is like all kinds of controversial, but generally the criteria is talking about the amount that is beyond what a normal person would eat in that particular time period, which has all kinds of things built into that. So, but officially, like Andy said, we're not here to diagnose. These are just things that we're providing as education and things to think about. And then mental health or primary care doctor or somebody like that would be the one who's diagnosing the actual eating disorder.
Totally.
I think it's interesting because when we're talking about these things from a spiritual perspective versus when we're talking about them from like the medical or health side of things, or just like in society, the way that we're thinking about food. And I think it shifts a little bit, right? Like we were talking about the gluttony side of things. So I think the problem area is there's this whole concept, and I don't remember, did you touch on this in your research around like the idea of diets as a religion? Did you come across that in your research?
Yes, please share more.
Yeah. So there's this general idea that when we are thinking about dieting, specifically around our bodies and our health and the way that we're thinking about eating, and you think about, like Annie mentioned before, right? Your societal norms. There are societal norms around dieting, right? There are people who do dieting together. There are things that we do and discuss. There are like entire cultures and industries built up around dieting or restricting our food or making ourselves feel a certain way about what we eat or why we eat, how we engage in food, right? There's this idea of an ideal, right? Like a state of being that is better than what you're currently at. There's a way of impacting your social standing and connection within that community. There are like holy items or holy or sacred practices and rituals and objects, right? Or foods. There are certain things that we do and think about. All the criteria of how the world would consider a religion or classify something as a religion versus like a movement or something like that, dieting and diets meet. Which means that when we're thinking about getting out of it too, if you're just trying to be like, I'm so sick of dieting, I'm just going to give this up. Emotionally and mentally and maybe even spiritually, it's like if you were leaving a religion. A religion that you've probably been in for a long time and have a lot of structural supports and like reinforcements around. So it's really difficult to move out, even if you really want to. It's really difficult to do that in a way that you fully extracted yourself and been put into the freedom that you want. But it's just really fascinating to me because it brings a lot more, I think, gentleness and empathy around trying to change our behaviors and change the way we think about these things and also the way we interact with other people.
The Magdala podcast is sponsored by the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University. The Catholic Theology Show covers themes such as the value of a Catholic higher education, religious liberty, how to pray, the philosophies of St. Thomas Aquinas, and more. Stream episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and learn more by visiting the link below.
I'm glad you bring this up. I remember, so the way that me and Shelly met in college, both my undergrad honors thesis and master thesis were all sort of asking dietitians the question of, can we integrate religious or spiritual conversations in our dietetic practice? And I got to poll, it was over like 300 dietitians of all sorts of different faith and religious backgrounds. And then I got to have interviews with maybe a dozen, again, of Christian, Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist. And I remember one atheist woman that I got to talk to who was very pro having, I'll say, religious or spiritual dialogue with clients if that's what they were comfortable with and wanted to bring up. She was not afraid to discuss that when it was important to a client. I remember she was one of the ones who brought up, to some people, the food itself is the religion. And so I'm going to use and match their language to the extent that it's helpful, right? Like if it's doing something that's disordered or harmful for them, but to the extent that's helpful, I'm going to match almost the religious dialogue that's happening. Because like you just said, when we talk about food, we are talking much more than like if our macros are perfect to what our body needs. When we talk about our family history and our culture and everything that makes up all of our thoughts and ideas, our intake around food, it can take up almost as much space or more than enough space of that of a religion. So I love that concept and idea, and I think that's a good sort of, I'll say, examine for the average person to think about, like, how much does food or thought about food control your life? Obviously, it's healthy to think about food because you are made to be nourished all the time. It's if you're a mom of 4 kids, you're probably thinking about food pretty active because you have all your kids all the time who are hungry and you're trying to feed them and put meals on the table. So obviously in state of life, like what that thought pattern is changes, right? So I'm not here to share like what a normal thought pattern around food is. But I do think it's a good question. If this is something that controls all of your thought and mind and ideas, like I can just share, like when I was really struggling with eating disorders, everything that I did, if I knew that food would be there, I would hyperanalyze the situation. Like, okay, I'm going to a grad party later. There will probably be a sheet cake, but I'm only allowed to have this much of a slice of it, and I'm going out to dinner at this time, so I can't have more than 3 pretzels, whatever like rules I like put in my head, I would hyperanalyze that situation. Anything that involved food. So I started thinking about the caloric content of the Eucharist when I was receiving communion. That was a thing for a few years. I remember trying to like log even that when I was hyperfixating on calorie counting. If I only drank 50% of whatever my beverage was, I would measure out exactly if it was 50% or 60% to know like the caloric intake and the energy I was receiving. And so I can say like in that season of my life, that's all I was thinking about all the time. I remember having a very distinct memory, maybe like senior year of high school. I was like, you know what? I think I'm always going to be like this. I think I'm going to be on my wedding day and probably calorie counting, and it'll just be fine because I've always been like that. I can testify to, I didn't think about that at all on my wedding day. So that's a glory. Thank you, Lord. But it's crazy when you're in a thought process like that. Like you said, just in a religious standpoint, when it happens for so long, it can be so difficult to get out of because it's formed then more of a habit. Like both your body and mind are used to functioning in that space. So I would just share that that's a very helpful question to think about. Like how much does food control your thoughts, your life? I feel like that's a good examine question when people start to think about their relationship with food.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hear so much about like food noise nowadays, and I'm sure you have lots of thoughts about that too, but food noise, for those of you who haven't heard it defined, is just that constant like conversation and commentary about food or the food thoughts. And in society, right, thinking about what has been made normal, we've made that be a really bad sign that something is off. In the non-diet world, where Annie and I live as eating disorder dietitians, we feel differently about that, right? Like a lot of times what you'll hear from somebody like us is, yes, maybe it is a sign that something's up, but it's the sign, not the problem.
Yes.
That usually it can be addressed by focusing on the underlying problem of your relationship with food and how are you eating and are you eating? Because we know that biologically, if you don't have enough nourishment, you will get more food noise. That happens as a driver so that you eat more. And for a lot of people, that goes down with recovery. Like I've had one person I worked with say that she had to get a new hobby because she had so much extra time and so much extra brain space where she wasn't thinking about food. Wow. And now she needed something else to do. So I just, if that's what you're experiencing, if that's something that has been resonating with you from kind of like general society, I would encourage you to also look into, some of these other things and think about how is your relationship with food, not just how do we get rid of this food noise.
Totally. And I love when discussing food noise, just like you said, that it's being assigned to something else. It points to we are body and soul, and God wants our wholeness in every area of our life. And oftentimes, in different spheres, there are different pockets when we talk about like the medical space. There are some that can be so hyper body focused that we lose the whole person. And so when we think about like, if we're having food thoughts, it's so good to then ask the why. What is this pointing to? Because it's probably a sign of both something mentally that your brain's trying to tell you, and probably something physiologically that your body's trying to tell you. And that's because we are body and soul, and these things work together. And I think about that a lot in the context of why we're even having an episode like this on the Magdala podcast, is we hear it time and time again of women who go through our groups who, I'll share actually one of my most recent groups that I was leading. We were maybe halfway through group, and one of the women sort of shared out loud. She was like, you know what? As I've been going through healing in this area of my life, I feel like the Lord's just been revealing so many other areas that need healing. And I think I'm going to start looking at my relationship with food and my body. And immediately, like 3 to 4 other women were like, oh my gosh, me too. I've been thinking about the same thing. Because when we enter into a healing process with the Lord, we realize that we are so interconnected, that none of these parts of our story are like a random, like a random puzzle piece, just the corner piece, and it's not connected to anything else, and you don't need it to create the rest of the puzzle. No, every single piece, yes, has a role, is usually more connected to some pieces than others, but all of them are crucial, and all of them are interconnected. And so when we think about our healing process, this is why we're having an episode like this, is because this has been just the story of so many women in our community. And we also know this from a scientific background that like addictions sort of go hand in hand. I'm pretty sure the statistics of people who struggle with binge eating, who also struggle with binge drinking, is like 60 to 70% of people. We see this a lot with alcoholics, that as they're trying to recover, they just sort of develop a new addiction. And so when we think of something like women who are healing from sexual addiction, we know that it's common to develop other addictive tendencies, to act out in that way. For both your brain and your body to find other outlets or try to. It's all part of the healing process because any process we enter into that's breaking a habit is going to take time. It's not going to be the snap of the fingers. And these things can sort of go hand in hand. So just curious if you've seen in your work just any sort of overlap of maybe addictive tendencies or ways that these things have sort of come into play with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, like you're saying, right, that kind of like whack-a-mole type of rolling addiction.
I like that.
Where it just keeps coming up in a different area. Like it's the same pattern, different substance or different behavior, right? I've seen that. I've also seen this idea of like, whether it's because of the underlying thing is, lacking those coping mechanisms that maybe are more ordered and more healthy or helpful. Or if it's just kind of like the behavioral, like a learned response, as we are coming in and out of different communities, feeling like sometimes we pick up things from the actual other communities, right? Like we were talking about before about
yes.
the things, but other times it can just be habitual for ourselves. Like we need something that kind of fits the same feeling of like how that, whatever substance or behavior we were using before, how that was serving us, and it hasn't been replaced, right? And so we're just going to find something else and use that in a disordered way as a replacement for it, just because of the habitualness of it. Or even like maybe, you know, whatever substance you were using, like from a biochemical perspective, maybe whatever substance you were using was actually dampening down either your hunger or your fullness cues, or affecting your sleep, which can also affect you, you know. So like there's other pieces of that that can be kind of like interplaying, right? Or causing maybe additional things like we don't want to just say like, oh, you're just replacing it for like your coping skills. Like maybe there's some biochemical things happening, or there was like self-medicating going on that now needs to be addressed from a medical or psychiatric perspective, that can be really, really helpful when we're talking about health and like whole person health, that we're actually looking into like, oh, is there neurodivergence here? Because that can really impact eating. It can really impact, you know, addictive behaviors. It can impact your coping ability. It can impact all kinds of things. And like, if that's not being addressed somewhere, you're more likely to have these things popping up, right?
Totally.
Or like if maybe you just don't have the support you need as you move away from one of the communities that was all supporting, you know, maybe your substance use, and now you're in this new kind of figuring out what your resources, what your community and all that kind of thing, like that puts you at risk, right? But same going the other direction, I think if we're undernourished, then it's really difficult for us to use like self-discipline or to think clearly about what do we want to do. Like our undernourished brains don't function as well. So if you're trying to, you know, have success or healing around another addictive behavior, and you're undernourished to start with, it's going to be so much harder to address that behavior than if you were nourished, because your body's going to be more prepared to do that work, just from a physical perspective.
Totally. I'm glad you bring that up. We've seen this a lot. Magdala's been growing. We've only been a thing for about 5 years, and we've seen sort of, I'll say more anecdotally, because we don't necessarily take data on this, but our moderators, our volunteers, our leadership team have seen time and time again that women who show characteristics of, I'll say, caring for their whole person. So things of they're not, to our knowledge, aren't restricting, skipping meals, are trying to get adequate amounts of sleep, are generally trying to move, just like basic sort of minimum maintenance of self, tend to see much more better outcomes in recovery from what you're just describing. The malnourished individual is going to function at a lesser capacity in every aspect of their life, of brain functioning, of speed in which you can process something, your speed in which you can digest something, the speed at which any sort of signals in your body can send. Like the list can go on. And something that I'm really excited about in our community with Magdala as we finish the edits of the new version of our curriculum is we're actually going to ask all women who go through our curriculum to create their own standard of self-care, is what we're calling it, but basically their own commitment and goals to very basic areas of self-care. So that includes sleep and nourishment and movement. And none of this is meant to create rigid goals. But it's so often that women will come through group, and once you say yes to healing in one area, the floodgates open and you realize how much you need healing in other areas. And it's time for women to recognize that, wow, actually, you're right. I'm only getting 4 hours of sleep, and I feel like that's not helping me recover from sexual addiction. Or I'm only getting 4 hours of sleep, and then I tend to overeat at all of these meals, which then causes me to want to restrict. I'm guessing these things are related, and sometimes it's helpful to have a structure, again, just to write these things down. And oftentimes it's really helpful to have the structure of another layer of support, which is what you're hitting on so big. And we both know that dietitians can be an amazing layer of support when you're thinking about issues with our relationship with food and our body. But I would love to ask you, Shelly, like a lot of people don't even know what a dietitian does. Like I could imagine a woman like listening to a podcast like this, really vibing with what we're saying. Maybe we're articulating things she's thought about, but maybe she doesn't stay up at night thinking about it like maybe I do, because I just sort of love this field of stuff, you know? And I could see her being like, wow, I feel like talking to somebody about this area of stuff could be supportive or helpful for me, but I don't even know what that would look like. I would love for you to share, like, what would a dietitian actually do? What would a session with you look like? How would you dialogue about this? Anything like that.
So generally I say, you know, the first 1 to 2 sessions is like really diving deep in your life and your situation and what's been working, what's not been working, what have you tried before. Basically like an intake anywhere else in the health or wellness professions where we get to know each other, right? And you get to bring your questions and you get to bring yourself and your situation to somebody who can hold space for that. And then we start looking at like, okay, what are the things that you're already doing well at? How can we support you in continuing those? And what are the areas that you aren't, you know, you're struggling a little bit, or you're missing something, you're missing resources, you're missing support. Maybe you need a little correction in your knowledge or filling in the gaps or something, because maybe you haven't had the chance to have a lot of nutrition education in the past. And we work through that. Usually like Annie and I would be really talking about your specific situation, right? We're not going to be putting you on plans or like, everybody goes through this step and then this step.
Yeah.
It's more like, hey, we're going to meet you where you are. And then we're going to walk with you through that process of getting to where you want to go. Keeping in mind like the bigger vision and why of what you're doing. So not necessarily just saying like, I want to eat more vegetables. We're going to be like, great. What do you think that's going to give you? What are you hoping you'll get out of eating more vegetables, right? If it's like, oh, well, I'll just be healthier because I feel like I should be healthier. Maybe we're not going to start there, right? Maybe we're going to start with something you actually want to do a little bit more. But maybe you want to be healthier because you have kids and you want to set a good example, or you realize you feel better with vegetables, but you just don't like any of them. Or you know, maybe it's something else. Like maybe you feel like eating more vegetables will change your body shape, and there's stuff there that we want to address. And we're going to work, you know, a lot of times we're working with your mental health person in kind of that team approach, and we're really coordinating that care so that we are looking at that whole person approach to say like, okay, we're addressing this from multiple angles, and we might be talking about the food and the context of the food and how things are being affected or affecting the food. And then the mental health provider is going to be looking at what's the social situation, what's your emotional situation. Of course, there's some overlap there, but how do you approach this? How do you change like the psychodynamics of the context of all of this happening, right?
Totally.
Of the ways that we're thinking about things, that the thoughts and emotions about our food and our bodies and our health and all of those things.
Totally. That's a beautiful overview. And the only other thing I would add is I feel like sometimes in my role as a dietitian, I find myself helping people put language or create language for things that they just didn't have the language for before. I find in the area of food and nutrition, so much of this dwells deep in the brain space and doesn't always get out. And when people first try to use language in relation to this, they sometimes don't even know how to phrase or articulate things. Or right, you're describing so beautifully a lot of the whys behind all of these thoughts that we have. Again, so many of these food thoughts, food noise have so much backing that can go back into stories with our family, can go back into random thing you read on a label once and now you can't forget it. And oftentimes we've never even like spoken it out loud. And so I've found with a lot of my clients, it's a lot of like creating a common language together. And the more that you're able to articulate what's going on, the more that you're able to help heal from something like this. And with that, Shelly, I can only imagine somebody's listening and be like, I could see how that could be helpful, but they're maybe on the edge. It could be, again, that self-sufficiency piece that we've talked about previously. Do I really need this right now? I guess for somebody who might reach out to you just to ask a few questions, show some interest, but isn't sure if she wants to commit, what would be just some words of encouragement that you would share if a woman feels stirred right now of like, oh, maybe I could use some extra support here, but don't know how? Any words of encouragement that you would say?
Yeah, I think I usually approach this from an informed decision-making style. So what do you need to know about how it works, what the pros and cons are, just to start exploring that for yourself, right? Like you're interested, you're thinking about it. So let's find out more about what that would look like. Let's find out more about the pros and cons of working with somebody or not working with somebody, right? Because there's all kind like you've gotten this far already. There's things that you're doing that are already working without somebody involved. So how do we look at what are all the things that could be beneficial and what are some of the things that may be a sacrifice that you're going to have to do, or the discomfort of change, the discomfort of sharing your story with a provider that you don't know yet, right? Like there's some discomfort in that, and that's okay. It's okay to feel like it's not just like 100% I know this is the thing. Like if that's where you are, that's fantastic, great. People like Annie and I are happy to talk to you.
Yeah.
And if you're not there, that's okay too, right? Like we were talking about earlier in the conversation, sometimes it takes us multiple times to feel like we're ready to make that change. But each time we think about it, it's another movement on that, we call it stages of change, that we're thinking about moving through that process of getting to the point where we're able to accept and ask for support. So if you're earlier in that, that's okay. We can still chat. If you don't like, it's a lot of dietitians actually will have like no obligation consults, like just to see if it's the right time, if it's the right fit, if it's the right like personality match, or topics or specialties or whatever. Like do one of those, look on a couple of websites, figure it out, see what it is that you would want, and then just explore a little bit. No obligation, just try it out. Not to try it out like commit to trying somebody, but like try out the next step, like in your head, even thinking about what it would be like to be able to share some of this stuff with another person who's not going to be shocked or scandalized by your thoughts inside your head, right? Yes. That can actually stand with you and step with you throughout that journey.
Yes. And Shelly, if somebody's interested in feeling it out with you and getting started in the process, how could they find you or get connected with you?
Sure. They can check out my website, confidentnutritionnow.com. And then if you're interested in contacting me or signing up for one of those, get to know you calls, you can go confidentnutritionnow.com/contact, and you'll have all the options there.
That's awesome. Well, Shelly, thank you so much for your time and chatting with us. Women, if you're interested in reaching out to Shelly, those will also be in the show notes below. If you're interested in reaching out to the practice that I work for, it's called Good Body Nutrition. You can find us at goodbodynutrition.com. And same thing, fill out a contact form. And the initial call is of no cost to you. Just come talk to us. Even just initial questions. We're here and we want to be a resource in this space. And Shelly, you've been so helpful. So thank you for joining us on the podcast. And until next time, I do have to end with Michael Scott from The Office for all my Office fans. Catch you on the flippity flip.
Thanks for listening. Check out more podcast episodes, blog posts, and how to get involved with Magdala by visiting our website, magdalaministries.org. Your love is meant to change the world. We hope to see you soon.